After months of buildup, the first votes in the 2024 election in Georgia are now being cast.
It's time to vote. It's time to vote.
We want to get it, make sure it gets in there.
Jackie and Eric Gibson were two of the more than 300,000 Georgians who participated in the first day of early voting, more than double the previous record.
The Gibsons voted at the County Line Public Library in DeKalb County. So did Teresa Renfro.
Nervous about the 5th, that something might pop off. So I said, I'm coming in to vote early. That way I know for sure my vote will count and there is no disruption.
And in Sumter County, 100-year-old former President Jimmy Carter voted by mail for Vice President Kamala Harris.
With early voting underway, volunteers are stepping up, knocking on doors and making phone calls.
Just let them know that President Trump is encouraging everybody to vote as early as possible.
What is your plan? And preferably to vote early so that there are no mishaps on Election Day.
Former President Donald Trump campaigned in Metro Atlanta this week. Harris is scheduled to visit on Saturday.
Plus 3 court decisions this week undercut moves by the Republican-led state election board. I'm WABE Politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE Politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. All right, let's talk about the early vote numbers so far and how voting is going this week.
So, Sam, as we tape this midday Thursday, more than 650,000 Georgians have already voted early in person. That number is going to be even bigger by the time this podcast drops. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says voters really need to make a plan.
If you want to vote absentee, make that decision today and get your request in. If you're going to vote early, take a look at your calendar and decide when you're going to vote early. And if you're going to vote on Election Day, decide what time. It's your choice, but please make a choice and figure out what your plan will be.
And Sam, I know that's not the most exciting thing to hear, but what the secretary said is the same message I'm hearing from campaign workers on the ground.
Yeah, tell me more about what you've been hearing from those campaign workers. I know you've spent some time talking with folks working the phones for both the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign, doing that grunt work of talking to voters one-on-one, which is so important as early voting is getting underway and, as the election day is right around the corner.
So, Sam, let me take you to the Trump campaign field office in Lawrenceville. It's an office building next door to where the Gwinnett County GOP holds its meetings. The walls were lined with signs, including Trump 2024, Trump Vance 2024, Swamp the Vote. The tables were covered with red cloth with volunteers sitting at them, and they were all waiting for Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance. But Sam, while they waited, some of the volunteers pulled out their smartphones. They logged into this app and started making phone calls on behalf of the Trump campaign.
That's why we need to make it too big to rig.
Debbie Foley of Gwinnett County showed me her phone and told me what she's been saying when folks do answer the phone.
We have a script, but it's basically letting them know that we're volunteering with the Republican Party of Georgia, and I'm checking to make sure that they're okay after the hurricane, and ask them if they were displaced or not, and if they have a plan for voting, ask if they're voting for President Trump, and if they're going to vote early in person or by mail, and just let them know that President Trump is encouraging everybody to vote as early as possible in case something crazy happens and you can't get to the polls on Election Day, like a hurricane.
Foley says she always wanted to be more involved, but it just never worked out. She was busy as a school teacher. She had a robotics team. But now that she's retired, she was trying to figure out how to get involved. She ended up going to a Trump meeting with a friend, which is what's led her to doing phone banking, including from home, along with door knocking. I asked her then, well, why now?
I've voted ever since I was 18. And I used to think, the pendulum always just swings left and right, and we're always kind of where we were. But it hasn't been that way since I guess 2008 was when things really started to change in a personal way that affected my students and affected my family and me personally. And it's like, this is important. And And it started to slide really fast the last 4 years.
Now, Sam, let me take you down Highway 316, down Interstate 85 to downtown Atlanta and another office building just east of Georgia State University's main campus.
We need Kamala Harris in the White House.
Harris campaign volunteers were there to pick up campaign signs, T-shirts, and hear from Stacey Abrams' rally for the Democratic nominee. Now, one of those volunteers was Janine Jackson. She, like Debbie, had a very similar message when she talks to voters.
What is your plan? And preferably to vote early so that there are no mishaps on Election Day.
And what is driving her to volunteer and vote is very different.
Everything that she stands for, just to restore democracy, reproductive rights for women, and just she is the better, in my eyes, the better candidate.
So, Sam, let's talk more about what Janine talked about there, reproductive rights. This came up during Trump's visit to Metro Atlanta this week.
Yeah, Trump did a town hall in Cumming in front of an audience of all women voters, though they were recruited mostly from various Republican groups in the area. You know, polls show Trump has been struggling with support among women compared to Harris. You know, there is a real gender gap in this race. Trump does much better with men. And Trump got a question from a woman in the audience named Pamela.
Women are entitled to do what they want to and need to do with their bodies, including their unborn. That's on them regardless of the circumstance. Some are necessary to save their own lives. Why is the government involved in women's basic rights?
So Trump's answer was kind of unwieldy, but I want to play two sections that give you a sense of it. He both took credit for the U.S. Supreme Court majority that overturned Roe versus Wade.
What we were able to do is through really the courage of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do this after years and years of turmoil.
But also realizing this issue is a real liability among many women voters is trying to create some distance from strict abortion laws in places like Georgia, where most abortions are banned after roughly 6 weeks.
It's going to be redone. You end up with a vote of the people. And some of them, I agree, they're too tough.
But there is ambiguity about what abortion policy might look like in a Trump administration, and many Democrats worry about the courts or the administration further restricting abortion and other reproductive rights nationwide. At this town hall, Trump, trying to rebut some of those fears, called himself the father of IVF, which of course is not true. In line at the Trump rally, I met friends Dory Walters and Tina McKay. Here's McKay.
You know, as much as I'm pro-life, I think that 6 weeks is tight. If states vote more than 6 weeks, I think that we should allow it.
But she says she does not put that on Trump, despite his appointments to the Supreme Court that paved the way for the overturning of Roe and ultimately these restrictive state laws to take effect. And besides, she says, there are other things more top of mind to her than abortion.
You know, and that's one of the things really the only things the Democrats are really running on. They don't have anything to stand on that's firm. I mean, how about our economy? How about our safety? How about our borders?
You know, Sam, last week you brought us voices of women from neighboring Cherokee County who tied Trump to the abortion law. How are Democrats talking about this issue and Trump's visit?
This week, Democrats organized a press conference with the family of Amber Thurman. ProPublica reported that state investigators determined Thurman died at 28 because medical providers delayed providing care due to Georgia's abortion law, and the state ruled her death preventable. This is Thurman's mom, Shanette Williams.
This could have been prevented. And when I found that out, everything changed. Everything changed. Initially, I wasn't a political person. I'm independent. But because of August the 19th, we've been thrown into an arena where we have to do something to honor Amber.
Now, one other interesting moment during that press conference, Rahul, Senators Warnock and Ossoff were asked what Harris could even do if Democrats do not control Congress. And Warnock basically said, well, Democrats wouldn't even be able to start that conversation if Trump is in the White House.
So, Sam, let's go back to the Trump campaign. Right after that town hall, he had a rally in Cobb County.
Early voting is underway. Get everyone out. Get everyone you know. Just get them all out to vote.
And Sam, what else did you learn there?
This rally happened on the first day of early voting, so that was, of course, the opening and closing message here. And in between, though, Trump did get in some on-message points from the teleprompter about inflation and crime. There were also videos that played in between moments of his speech to help keep that message front of center. But this was a late-night speech that also veered into some dark places, especially in the rhetoric around immigration.
We will not be invaded. We will not be occupied. We will not be conquered. We will defeat the enemy at all levels of combat. We will defend our civilization, reclaim our sovereignty, and we will be a strong, proud, and free nation once again.
You know, he's talking about immigrants there, but, you know, in recent days, we've also heard him talking about defeating the enemy within, you know, in terms of domestic political opponents. So there's been some really tough rhetoric that we've been hearing out of these recent speeches, including here in Georgia. It's also interesting to note, Rahul, that Trump's rallies this week and next week are both in Metro Atlanta, not MAGA territory like Rome or Valdosta, like we saw more in 2020. Now, if this is a strategy to reach, you know, on the fence suburban voters in places like Cobb or Gwinnett County, some of that rhetoric that we've heard from Trump does not really seem designed to reach them. So I do wonder how effective this strategy will really be. Though, Rahul, we did hear Trump again praise Governor Brian Kemp, which got cheers in the crowd. And we know that Kemp is popular both among the most Trump-aligned members of the Republican electorate, but also from some of these more suburban swing voters here in Metro Atlanta.
And Sam, as we charge toward Election Day, the top candidates and their top surrogates are going to keep making their way to Georgia. Vice President Kamala Harris will be in Atlanta Saturday evening. Then former President Trump returns to Georgia Wednesday with a campaign rally in Gwinnett County. Then Vice President Harris returns to Georgia Thursday to appear with former President Barack Obama. And former First Lady Michelle Obama is scheduled to be here in 2 weeks.
All right, we've got to take a break here. You're listening to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
Welcome back to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. So, Sam, amid all of that hullabaloo of a Trump rally, you had not only one, but two big court rulings related to Georgia elections. And then a third came on Wednesday evening. Let's begin with the top line. Where do things stand now?
Well, Wednesday night, Fulton Superior Judge Thomas Cox invalidated 7 rules passed in recent weeks by the Georgia State Election Board. That includes controversial changes to the certification of election results and a hand count of the number of Election Day ballots, which was opposed by election officials. The rules had alarmed these local election officials, as well as voting rights groups and even some Republican state officials. They worried the changes would create confusion or disruptions during this critical election. Cox declared the rules, quote, illegal, unconstitutional, and invalid, and said they should not be followed. And in assessing these new rules more broadly passed by the state election board, Cox determined that the board had overstepped their authority.
Okay, Sam, but you know, there's been this flurry of different lawsuits over these elections rules, right? Help us understand all of the developments this week.
Right. The Georgia State Election Board has generated lots of blowback. The Republican majority, which has been praised by Trump, has advanced many last-minute rules. Most controversial among them are these rules related to the certification of elections. And people were worried chiefly because they seem to imply that local election board members could decline to certify election results. despite Georgia law saying otherwise. 3 different lawsuits popped up around this question. Julie Adams, a Fulton County GOP election board member who has previously abstained from certifying election results, wanted the court to give her the green light to do just that, ruling her duties are discretionary. 2 other suits asked the court to do the opposite, rule that certification is mandatory, not discretionary.
Okay, then what happened?
Well, on Tuesday, Judge Robert McBurn ruled that local election board members in Georgia may not refuse to certify results under any circumstance, though he had yet to weigh in on the rules themselves when Cox issued his order in that other case we were just talking about. McBurn had also separately, in another case, blocked the hand count rule in a case brought by Cobb County's Board of Elections. He called it too much, too late. But then, once again, Cox went further, tossing the rule and other rules completely. Now, on Thursday, the Georgia Republican Party and the Republican National Committee filed an appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court to that Cox ruling. So this suit is not over, but Election Day is getting closer, and so the courts may be hesitant to change course again, at least for right now, this close to an election.
You know, Sam, let me zoom out and talk about an interesting event I attended this week. It was actually the same day as some of these rulings coming down. And the event was called Safeguarding Our Democracy. And it was held at Georgia State University's Speakers Auditorium. It fits about 400 people. It's been in a room that I've been in dozens of times over the past 2 decades. I've seen gun control debates, even economic forecasting conferences. This event featured elections officials, academics, and others who are working in that voting and election space, like lawyers. For example, Gabe Sterling from the Georgia Secretary of State's office was there. Democratic State Representative Syra Draper was there. One of the most interesting people I talked to, Sam, was Matt Mashburn. He's a former Republican member of the state election board, a longtime Republican poll watcher, and right now he's part of the independent team of election monitors for Fulton County.
Right. You know, when I've talked in the past in relation to the state election board and some of these new rule changes we've been seeing happening, I've noted how more activist Republicans have replaced more mainstream Republican members on the board in recent months. And Mashburn is exactly the kind of mainstream Republican member that I'm talking about.
You know, Sam, one of the things that jumped out at me was his call for more people to critically look at claims of election fraud and pushback on election misinformation.
Not just blindly accept allegations that don't even make sense. Like there was an allegation that 2,500 people that weren't registered voted, and my question of that is that critical thinking. You would want the people to. You would want the electorate out there to go, well, how's that even possible? How would they know what ballot to give them? I just don't. I see a lot of people pushing back. Gabe pushes back. Sarah pushes back. I see a lot of pushing back, but we need more people to push back on especially on things that don't even make sense.
And one other thing, Sam, the majority of this audience was college students, and there was a specific call to them not to share rumors or possible election misinformation. 2 other things, there was a call, hey, make sure you vote, of course, and to not tune out before Election Day.
And before we wrap up, I want to talk about 2 notable early voters this week.
So, Sam, on the first day of early voting, our Matthew Pearson caught up with Libertarian presidential candidate Chase Oliver, who cast a ballot for himself at the Tucker Library. The 39-year-old has been on the ballot in Georgia before, but still, this was a big deal.
It always feels weird seeing your name on the screen and selecting yourself. It's a little surreal. I did it when I ran for Congress and Senate, but this is even bigger because it's not just me being able to vote for myself, but it's friends and family from across the country. That's very cool. I've already seen people filling out their absentee ballots, and while it's very surreal, it's also very rewarding. It's kind of like we've been running this race for 2 years now, essentially, so it feels really rewarding to see the finish line ahead of you.
And Rahul, former President Jimmy Carter has voted as well.
That's right, Sam. You know, the folks over at the Carter Center let us know that the 100-year-old's ballot is in. You know, last month at the musical celebration of Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday at the Fox Theater, grandson Jason Carter talked to me and other reporters about the former president voting.
He was excited to turn 100, but he's more excited to cast his ballot for Vice President Harris. And I think he's ready to turn the page on Donald Trump like many of the rest of us. And I also think that he does believe in this historical moment, right? It would be an incredible story at the end of his 100-year life that is continuing on, as we know, to have grown up in the segregated South and for his one of his last political acts to be helping to elect a black woman as a president. I do think it would be important.
On that note, that is all the time we have for this edition of Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
Our producer is Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick. You can get more politics at wabe.org/election2024.
We'll talk to you next week.